Alrighty. Good morning, good evening, good wherever part of the day it is for you. So in this one is just going to be going through me putting this engine in. So you saw the last one, I got the engine out. Didn't want to take the front dampener off, but I did to get it out, and you can get it out through the top with an automatic trans without taking the wheels off, the whole axle shaft assembly, the K member out. You can get the engine out without removing pretty much everything. Don't have to remove the front clip, trans, battery, airbox, manifold, or exhaust manifold. You can leave the radiator in. You can get the engine out with it through the top with a cherry picker. So going back in, this is going to be a little bit different. So like I said before, I removed the dampener off the old engine I put over here. I gotta figure out which stuff's good on that one. The spark plugs in this engine are like 15,000 miles old. I don't know what the spark plugs look in the used engine, but I did take off the front dampener to get this thing out. The only thing about taking the front dampener off is it's not keyed, so the engine's out of time now, and I don't really care to put this engine back in time. It's a boat anchor. It needs to be completely gone through and fixed correctly. It's a core at this point. I was not going to try and band-aid it anymore. I attempt one band-aid on this, but ultimately if I were to fix this engine properly, I would have to remove it, put it on my stand, take out the crank, the rod and piston, clean it up as best I could, inspect the whole thing. Probably I could get away with just replacing one rod piston assembly and put a used crank in it. The amount of money I would spend to do that, to fix this motor, I got that used engine over there to put in this. It feels good. It actually looks probably in better shape than this one as I've looked over it. But for me to put this engine in, I'm going to try something. Sorry for the light, because I don't know why. The ballast is bad in that one. This engine actually looks pretty dang good for about the same amount of miles as mine has. What we're going to do on this engine to put it in is, one, I'm going to remove the intake, fuel rail. I'm going to use the one that's on the car, not this one. This intake, I have to compare it with the one that came off of mine. There's valves, little throttle valves in these runners here. Probably hard to see. You'll see it when I probably take it off. That are really oblonged out in my manifold. I don't know how well this one is, but I'll take this off. I just put a thermostat in my motor that just came out, so I'm probably going to use that in this. I broke my water pump taking it off because I was an idiot and forgot a bolt. This water pump feels okay. I am going to remove this water pump to get the engine in. This one on this one is not great. It rolls freely, but you can hear it how it's very uneven bearing feel. This one is better than what mine was. So I'll be using this tensioner. This pulley off my motor is better, so I'm going to be putting this, take this one off, put mine on. I'm going to use this one. I'm going to keep the crank pulley on. This crank pulley is actually not in terrible shape. The harmonic balancer that it also is. Kind of hard to see. I'm so annoyed with this light right now. Kind of hard to see. I don't know if I have, where is that? Oh. No. If you can kind of see that. There's some cracking, but it's not terrible. And the harmonic balancer to replace that's like $70 with a $30 bolt. And you have to buy the timing stuff to put this engine in time. I really don't want to do that. I didn't care about taking it off the old motor because it's a boat anchor, but this motor, I don't really want to do that. So, the plan for this engine is to take the water pump off, that pulley, probably that pulley, the two alternator studs, because I won't be able to get it back in with them on. But what I'm going to try and do is we're going to come over here, take the EGR valve off the outlet water valve tube here off. I'm going to take this flex plate off. And with that, what I'm going to do is replace the rear main seal, but I'm not going to put the flex plate back on until I put the engine in. And let me explain. The amount of clearance I can get around said flex plate also equals the amount of movement I had to take to get the front to clear the subframe or the unibody frame rail here. The idea here is once I get the dampener around the subframe and I put the unibody frame right in line of where these are supposed to go, I'll have enough room behind the engine to re-put the flex plate, torque it back on, and then shove it against the transmission and bolt everything back together. That is the idea. Just so I don't have to retime this engine. Basically, all I'm trying to do is like a hot swap of this engine that actually seems to be in really good shape for what it is. We are gonna try and just sneak the engine around with the dampener still on so I don't have to deal with retiming this engine. So I think if I just leave the flex plate off, I can sneak it around the frame rail and then push it back forward into the frame, the sub or the unibody, whatever you want to call it. I'll probably have enough room to get a torque wrench, shallow socket, and then hold the flywheel, retorque the flywheel, and then shove it back together. That's the plan. And then everything else I can put back on it. So, I'm going to strip this engine, inspect the spark plugs, and then see what I'm going to need to use from mine and this one to make a good engine. Alright, here's where I'm at with this. This motor is pretty much stripped of how I'm going to drop it in. Rear main seal is off. Got a new one to put on. The torque converter bolts were Loctited in, which I thought they were. Or not the torque converter bolts, the flex plate, flywheel, flex plate, whatever you want to call it, bolts that go into the crank. I'm going to put some RTV on the bottom here and maybe some here because there was RTV for the pan. I'm going to install the new seal. All the gasket surfaces are clean. That other intake manifold that came off this engine is in better shape than what mine was. So I'm going to use that one. The spark plugs out of that motor just broke. So, and the spark plugs in this motor, sooty, kind of old. I'm just going to get new spark plugs. The old spark plugs shattered just trying to get them out. They weren't in there for that long, but whatever. I think they were the cheapest ones, so I don't. Spark plugs. I'll just order new ones. So everything else is off. As I said before, I'm going to put the rear main seal on and then try and stab this into the car. I'm going to keep the flex plate off until I get the dampener around the unibody frame rail, just so I don't have to remove this or do anything with this. Should be okay. Other than that, I still have to get some gaskets in, but if I can get this thing stabbed in the car for the time being, that would be good. But everything looks pretty good on this engine. Maybe even a little bit better shape than what mine was in, to be honest. The damper still is okay, so I'm not going to change. I'm going to try and get away with not messing with that, just because I don't want to have to retime this engine. It's such a whole ordeal, because you got the plug here that you put a pin in to find TDC where the crank is, and then you got to adjust the crank sensor depending on how this sets up. It's a whole ordeal that I don't want to mess with. So if I can skim around the frame rail with that, with the flex plate off, I'm going to. Probably use the PCV valve, that one, because the one in this one's kind of gumbo. And then I'm still waiting on a front engine mount and an AC compressor to come in. Really wish I had the engine mount. But other than that, I'm going to put that rear seal on, and then I'm going to try and stab this engine in here without taking the dampener off and see how well that goes. I think I can get around it with the flex plate off, and once the pulley is around this bulky part, once the pulley's around here, I can shove the engine forward, all the way forward, and I can probably torque the flex plate back on. That would be the idea. So let's put the rear seal on, which is pretty straightforward. It doesn't get that tight. It's like an O-ring type seal. Just need some RTV at the bottom here, and then just snug those bolts, probably a few inch-pounds. It seems like there's 2 dowels on these. Yeah. So that's the rear seal. I'm gonna install that and probably get the engine in. Alrighty, real quick here. You can sneak the engine back in here with the flex plate off. It's right here. I don't have to put this on. Like I said before, the dampener is below the unibody frame rail on this side, shoved all the way into the frame rail. There is literally just enough room to sneak this engine in and out, either by removing the flex plate or removing the dampener. There's more room if you remove the dampener. With the flex plate, it's you can't really even put a piece of paper in between it, because you have the crank bolt skimming the unibody on this side all the way down, while trying to get this, the rear crank / seal on this side around the bell housing. So hopefully I can sneak my torque wrench in between the engine and bell housing with a shallow socket. You can sneak this down in there, so I'm going to sneak that in there, torque this. I'll put the torque spec on your screen. I have it printed out here for the flywheel / flex plate. Still waiting for other gaskets to come in, but as long as I can get this bolted to the trans and then the torque converter bolted to this, I'm just glad I didn't have to remove that front dampener. I don't want to have to retime the engine and change the dampener and change the bolt. Try not to spend that. On the old engine, didn't care, but this engine, I do. So, new spark plugs are ordered. Everything else is going back together. So let's see if I can sneak this flex plate down in there and torque it. And then I can shove the engine back on the trans. Alrighty, so now we're on the downhill struggle. Because, oh my god, putting this thing in with the flex plate off of it, yeah, you're able to get it in. Was able to push it forward and get enough room to put the flex plate on, but oh my god, by myself, having it hanging from the cherry picker that way while trying to torque and hold the flex plate at the same time, I needed another 2 arms, which I didn't have at the time, so it literally took me way too long to do that by myself, but I was able to get it. Pain in the royal ass. But you can get it done. It's just a pain. So now the engine's kind of in. There's a jack stand holding the front of the engine up. I finally got my motor mount in. So now it's time to start throwing this thing back together basically as quickly possible. I have pretty much everything else in line from what I need. I got a new PCV valve, but this is in. Now it's throw this thing back together as quickly as possible. I got all my gaskets I need. Another like $60. AC compressor. I got a new one over here. There's a new AC compressor there. New front engine mount. And then just a bunch of gaskets in that box over there that I needed. Yeah. I did not take the dampener off. I did not take this engine crank position sensor off. This oil pressure switch down here, I didn't switch over at all. I'm going to see if this one works. We're just going to see if the light comes on, if the old one was stuck or not. We'll see. But now is the downhill struggle of just putting it back on, and then we're going to run it and see what I get. Got my exhaust bolts over here with studs. AC compressor bolts are over there. I think those are the starter bolts there. Yeah. So I'm going to get after it and just start laying rubber down and putting this completely back together. All the front accessories, all that jazz. Okay, from this clip, from the last clip, everything's back together, and I've been driving it for about a week just because I was trying to get it back together as fast as possible. I got to start it up and move it here.
Ready to go for your Sunday.
So, the oil pressure light works now, and that's probably because the old sensor was stuck, closed, or open. The one on the junkyard motor I put in is good. I might have said this before, the junkyard motor has like 2,000 more miles in the car, so it's about the same age. But this one is working good, and it was the best price for the engine itself was like $350 with a cord charge. I have to take the old one back to get $50 back, but other than that, this whole ordeal in total for just the engine swap, the junkyard engine swap, probably about $500 to $600. With my failed attempt to repair the original engine, probably $600 or $700. So I'm going to start it because I got to move it. little bit of a belt squeal, but whatever. I'm ignoring. New spark plugs, new gaskets for the intake, exhaust, new coolant, and new oil. Hose, coolant hoses are all the same. Pretty much just put it back together with everything I took off the old motor. Other than the intake manifold on this one that came off the junkyard motor is in better shape, so I'm using that intake manifold. My old one is on the old engine. No knocking, no tapping, no abnormal noises, good oil pressure. Good used engine for what I need it for, and I'd keep more eye on my oil this time and not be an idiot. So that's just wrap up of you can replace the engine out through the top if it's an automatic. You have to remove either the front dampener or the flex plate, but everything else is kind of standard. You can find videos on the front intake manifold, the rear manifold, the alternator, stuff like that, new motor mount. So this is the end of replacement of the engine. As I said, I've been driving it for about a week and no issues. No check engine light, no nothing. Sounds just fine. So keep better track of my oil and drive the tar out of this thing. Eventually I'll have to replace the subframe on this, but it's not terrible. But it is in the back of my head I would have to replace the subframe on this because of rust. But that's for another day. Yeah. This is the end of trying to quickly replace the motor swap. The way I did it was more broken up. You can remove the engine in about a weekend and put the engine in about a weekend if you did 8-hour days, 8 to 10 hour days, both Saturday and Sunday. So I think realistically this was maybe a month and a half down, because half the time was me trying to find a good used engine for a good price, and that's where I found this one. So used engine that isn't hurt, junk engine from my stupidity. That's it. That's pretty much it. I gotta move this, and I gotta put that engine in my truck and get my $50 back. So long. See you next time.